A wealthy landowner carefully prepared a magnificent evening feast for the most honored guests residing in the entire ancient city. He spent countless quiet hours arranging polished wooden tables and carefully selecting the richest meats from distant coastal markets. Faithful servants diligently polished heavy silver platters, while skilled musicians carefully tuned their ancient wooden stringed instruments. The ancient stone courtyard glowed with warm lantern light as long evening shadows slowly stretched across worn dirt pathways. When every detail was perfectly prepared, the host quickly dispatched his most trusted servant to deliver formal invitations. The weary messenger walked through bustling market streets, carrying carefully rolled parchment tied securely with vibrant crimson thread. He finally arrived at the first grand estate and respectfully presented the official summons to the waiting household. But the wealthy merchant merely glanced at the heavy parchment scroll and immediately dismissed the joyful invitation. He loudly claimed his newly purchased agricultural field demanded his immediate attention and urgent personal inspection. The devoted servant quietly moved to the second residence, where a prominent trader waited impatiently near the entrance. This wealthy man carefully examined 5 pairs of freshly acquired oxen standing patiently near the heavy wooden gate. He politely declined the grand celebration, explaining that he urgently needed to thoroughly test their strength and endurance. At the third luxurious home, a recently married couple received the wonderful news of the upcoming royal banquet. The young bridegroom smiled warmly, but firmly explained that his new wife required his complete and undivided presence. These sudden, polite excuses echoed through ancient neighborhoods, revealing a troubling pattern of worldly distraction and spiritual delay. The faithful servant slowly returned to his anxious master with a heavy heart and completely empty hands. The generous host stood silently in his courtyard, realizing the honored guests had foolishly chosen temporary pursuits over fellowship. Without any hesitation, he firmly commanded his weary messenger to step boldly into the crowded ancient city streets. He urgently instructed him to quickly gather the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame from every dark corner. The devoted servant hurried through narrow alleys where forgotten souls lived in quiet shadows and deep generational poverty. He carefully found a weary beggar leaning against crumbling brick walls, his trembling hands extended for copper coins. He gently guided a completely blind man who had never experienced warm sunlight reflecting off a grand banquet table. He carefully supported a weary lame traveler whose wooden walking staff had worn completely smooth from years of wandering. These completely unexpected guests washed their dusty faces and carefully donned borrowed linen robes for the evening celebration. When they finally arrived at the grand courtyard, the generous host warmly welcomed each one with completely open arms. The long wooden tables that once sat completely empty now joyfully overflowed with loud conversation and grateful tears. Yet the observant master quietly noticed that several honored wooden seats still remained completely vacant in the grand dining hall. He called his tired servant again and pointed firmly toward the dusty roads stretching far beyond the city walls. He firmly commanded him to venture confidently into the busy trade highways and quiet country lanes nearby. He ordered him to gently but firmly compel every weary traveler to enter the feast and find true rest. The dedicated messenger walked past ancient olive groves and climbed steep, rocky hills under a fading purple twilight sky. He discovered humble shepherds carefully guarding their restless sheep flocks near weathered stone watchtowers overlooking the quiet valley. He patiently approached tired farmers resting after long, exhausting days of harvesting dry wheat in the intense summer heat. He spoke to wandering merchants who carried heavy leather burdens on calloused shoulders along the dusty ancient trade routes. Each person suddenly heard a divine invitation that completely interrupted their ordinary daily routines and quiet earthly habits. The generous host proudly declared that his house must be completely filled with grateful and deeply joyful guests. This ancient biblical narrative reveals a profoundly beautiful spiritual truth about divine hospitality and eternal grace. The lavish banquet perfectly represents God's eternal kingdom, prepared with meticulous care long before human history officially began. The initial formal invitations perfectly mirror how heaven first calls those who feel spiritually secure and socially comfortable. Yet earthly comfort often breeds dangerous spiritual distraction, causing human hearts to prioritize temporary achievements over heavenly fellowship. The sudden polite excuses clearly symbolize how mundane concerns easily replace eternal priorities in our daily earthly lives. God never forces spiritual attendance, but He deeply desires willing companionship and genuine relationship at His table. When the privileged proudly decline the summons, divine grace immediately turns toward the marginalized and completely overlooked. Heaven never measures true spiritual worth by accumulated earthly wealth, social status, or physical perfection. The broken and deeply weary quickly discover that divine invitation brings unexpected healing and complete spiritual restoration. Every empty wooden chair quietly represents a precious human soul that heaven desperately wants to warmly welcome and embrace. The distant winding roads and narrow lanes symbolize the farthest reaches of human isolation and deep spiritual doubt. God's faithful messengers travel tirelessly across countless generations to ensure absolutely no one remains permanently excluded from the celebration. This powerful ancient parable carefully challenges modern believers to honestly examine their own daily response to divine calling. We must clearly recognize that true spiritual readiness matters infinitely more than temporary worldly standing or reputation. The eternal feast continues actively today, offering boundless grace to anyone truly willing to leave their earthly excuses behind. Step boldly into the radiant light, accept the sacred invitation, and discover eternal joy at the Master's table. Pause for a moment and notice how this story invites the heart to trust God when the answer is not immediate. The people in Scripture were not polished heroes. They were ordinary souls learning obedience under pressure. That is why this passage still speaks to modern believers who feel tired, delayed, or unseen. God often builds faith in the hidden place before He reveals fruit in the public place.